Okay, so I can begin?
You may begin.
I can begin. Okay, have a sip of coffee. Okay.
Yeah.
Thomas, this is Catherine Austin Fitz and Thomas Meyer in your lovely home in Basel, Switzerland. Thomas, I can't thank you enough for having us, letting us come into your home and film you and have a conversation. All the way we drove from the Netherlands, and all the way I was thinking, I get to talk to Thomas.
Well, I'm overwhelmed. I think this is a big proof of trust, and I hope you will not be disappointed. I'm very honored that you come here into this home and that we are eager to continue our talks. Our
Right.
last talk was last summer.
Yeah, we talked about evil and,
Yes.
and how to, and it was very popular conversation at Celerity.
Yeah, a subject that is unfortunately not losing its actuality, does it?
Right, right. It's very important. So we're going to talk today. The title I gave our talk was "The Future of Europe," and we have many things we want to discuss. But first, I want to take a minute for you to describe the present age and what you're publishing and what you're doing. We just published an article from the present age at Celerity that was very popular.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we could talk about that. But tell us about the present age, how you came to do it, what it is.
Well, it was a second step. The first journal we founded is called Fitting the Subject, Der Europäer. You know, that's the German title of the magazine. And this was an afterfruit after I written a biography of a man who was quite an important European, Ludwig Polzer-Hoditz, who wanted to have a Europe without the interference of the church and of the more Masonic side. And this was a model for me for our Europäer. What is really European?
Right.
And what is not? Today, Europe, in a way, is a vassal of the United States. Europe has lost its, almost lost its cultural individuality. And their aim, maybe we can go into that later, would be that Europe is a bridge, becomes a real bridge between West and East, especially Russian East. And this bridging function is not working. That was behind Europäer, and the present age is in a way trying to communicate these things to also the English-speaking people, but not only to communicate a European perspective, but to take in a little bit what they have as a perspective on the times. So I think we should also cover not only Europe, but America.
Yeah. Now you publish monthly in both German and English.
Yes, correct.
Right.
With the exception that the German has 3 times a double issue, which gives us a bit air to breathe. Whereas the present age comes every once.
Right, right. Okay, well...
And the present age, by the way, was inspired by a man that you know, Dean Dunlop, because he wanted, as being this universally active economist with a global view in a good sense, he said to his friend Stein, it would be good to have a journal. And he edited this journal monthly about culture, economy, politics from a universal point of view. That was his subtitle.
Right.
And as I was very much linking myself with the work of these individualities, we took the title, recreated it. So this is a kind of a historical continuity we wanted also to demonstrate with the title The Present Age. And I think it's a good title.
So I want to step back for a second. Before we go into what's going on in Europe now, I wanted you to just brief us a little bit about what is the threefold social order.
Oh.
A little philosophic background for the way things are.
It's not only philosophical, but maybe, of course, there is it. Let's start with the economic part of threefold. Economy, political life, spiritual, cultural life.
Right.
Which in fact are today not existent in a desirable autonomy, because economy rules everything. Education, universities, it's all in a way dependent on the economic interests of relatively few people.
Right.
This is not healthy, as you know very
Right.
well, of course. Now, the idea would be to have economy not being overpowerful in all matters of life, which today is the fact, and to have a spiritual, cultural life which has more power, more independence, and the political life would shrink
Right.
to the function of controlling public life, security. And today, you know, what people talk in political parliaments about things they don't understand themselves is just a wasted energy.
Right.
So the idea would be not to have something new, but actually to give the tendency, the healthy tendencies of autonomy of these three things a chance to realize itself.
Right.
Threefold is not a program, but it's kind of a help to realize what is there in tendency, but crushed by power, absolute power ridden individuals and social streams. And one of the great things of threefold, I think, is you have the possibility to give the three ideals that everyone knows, also, of course, in America, the French Revolution: equality, liberty or freedom, and
Equality. It's equality, liberty, and
brotherlyhood. Or
right.
how do you say? Brotherlyhood?
Fraternity.
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 These three ideals are all very deep rooted. It appeals more or less to everyone, but they can never be fruitfully realized in a state which has too much confusion of economy, politics, and spiritual things, which are in the classical thing in the unity state, as threefold people call it. Everything is centrally organized in these three realms, and that is contradictory, because we cannot be fraternal in spiritual affairs in the same sense.
Right.
If something is true, we don't share the truth so that we make half-truths of it, and then, we cannot say, if somebody says 2 and 2 is 4, this is a fact that everyone has to share. So there are certain necessity laws in spiritual life. On the other hand, the individual has to find its way into it. It's an individual opinion. If somebody writes a book or makes a piece of art, individualism is right there. But if you put the individualism in the economic sphere, you have it on the wrong place. There you have to think for all, for the whole humanity. In the cultural life, we want to have the best of the individuals. In the economic life, we need people who think really, truly, globally, and that's not achieved today.
And I want to come back to that and talk a little bit about the Solari model, but one of the reasons that I wanted to talk with you now was we're struggling in America with enormous debasement of the culture.
Mm-hmm.
And the question before us that we often ask is, how do we preserve and nurture Western culture? And I think Europe is struggling with the same debasement.
Yeah.
And the question is, why is it happening, and what do we do about it? How do we nurture Western culture?
Yeah, we have actually, and this is a part of threefold, we need a free spiritual life, a real freedom of expressing your individual truth, and not have a media and a press controlling everything. And this is, of course, not the case. We have now a recent example here in Switzerland, that even in Switzerland, the freedom is not there to the degree that you would wish for. We are overflooded by catchwords, and so many people are impressed by catchwords. You know, the main political catchword is conspiracy theorists. We don't want any conspiracy theorists. And this is a bad sign. People tend to lose the ability to think. They use words which are attached to emotions, and of course you're afraid if this word is thrown into your face. So you act accordingly, which is really silly, because we should rise above words. We have to speak, but the word is not the universe.
Well, but there's a tremendous amount of resources being invested in creating a false picture of reality, and then attacking anybody who tries to create an accurate picture.
Absolutely. There was a historian who said in Germany, what we need after the Holocaust or during is a new category, which he says we need a category of demonic, not irrational, because there are things going on which have to be said, they are not rational, but they are effective. And to the spiritual life, which is part of the threefold, belongs the will to expand your horizon and to take into account spiritual facts. For example, this would be an article in the present age. What is the effect of lying for decades about huge major events in the 20th century? This has an effect on the consciousness.
Right.
Because behind lies there are also a certain amount of spiritual beings, not the highest.
Right.
And the effect is even stronger if we don't have a knowledge of that. And I think one of the effects is people get confused or they get disencouraged to truth seeking.
Right.
Because when you're looking for the truth of something about which a lot of lies are there, you can even feel there is a resistance.
Well, you attract in all the spirit and intelligence of lies.
Yeah.
And you push away all the spirit and the intelligence of light.
Right.
And you create for yourself a field which is entangled in a mess.
Exactly.
Right.
So you need a determination.
It's like baggage you have to carry around.
Exactly.
Right.
So you need a determination to pierce appearances. And this is getting objectively harder today because all the press, it's all appearances. It's not truth.
We know it's getting easier in the United States.
Is it?
Only because during the campaign, you had a candidate who kept cracking, Trump started calling the corporate media fake news.
Yeah.
But you get he would bring up these topics that were defiant of the official reality. So he would bring up the problem with vaccines. Yeah. He would attack Common Core. He would do he would say NATO's a stupid and waste of money. So he would say things which were violated all the orthodoxies.
Exactly.
And what happened was it gave people permission to then start to violate orthodoxies.
So you think it's a more open climate by that?
Much more open now than it was before the campaign started.
Interesting.
Now, it can be very divisive.
Yeah.
But the cracks and the credibility of the corporate media, if you look at the polls, has never been lower. It's the lowest of any major institution in the United States. So he has succeeded in branding the corporate media as not credible, and the polls show that the majority of people agree it's not credible.
And maybe also because the alternative media have become more interested in the focus of many people. They know there are different sources of information.
Right. So you see a dispersion of where people are getting their information.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's good and sometimes it's bad. It's a mixed bag.
Well, we need then a culture which has an education which helps people to become individual and to become discerning, to have the appetite for forming your own judgment and not leave it to the specialists.
Right.
And I think that's not really developed enough, not even in Europe. In Europe, I think there is a tendency to absolutely going down culturally to a certain degree.
Well, it certainly feels when I'm here as though you have the same challenge of the culture being under attack. At the same time, if you look at the life in Europe, I almost feel like there's more infrastructure here dedicated to culture and cultural pursuits. And so it's, I enjoy a lot of cultural pursuits here that I can't get in the United States.
Yeah.
So there's a richness here that we don't have in the United States. And I, as somebody who every year drinks at the well of that richness, I'm very interested in how to preserve and protect it. So there was a very, one of my favorite commentators, John Laughlin, during the French campaign, made a big deal about Macron saying there is no French culture.
Well, I think this is one of the few true things he said.
Really?
I mean, he is a made-up phenomenon.
Right.
If you look at him, it's almost that he is, in a way, an empty individual who was put there, sustained from outside, because one wants to have certain ends with him. For example, he wants to strengthen Europe after the Brexit, but he is a man of the Grand Orient, for example. He was there, he was backed by people in the Grand Orient, that's the traditional Masonic stream, political Masonic. There was a good Masonic stream at the time of Goethe, of course.
Right.
But then after the First World War, in the First World War, Masonry generally became just an instrument of politics.
Right.
And that was the end of the good side. And so the Grand Orient today, if you know that they back him, you know that he is a boy of interests of powerful people. That's it.
Right.
And when you speak to simple people, I was having a chance in Paris before the election to talk to the taxi drivers and so. And it was clear they don't have any connection because he has no connection to the people of the street.
Right.
And that's a bad sign for Europe. So it's all a show. It's all a performance in a way. And in Germany you have Merkel with her fatal politics of immigration, which will turn Europe into a war place of civil wars, I think.
So let's turn to immigration, because I'm very interested in the differences between the immigration controversy in the United States and in Europe. In your opinion, what has the immigration done to Europe? What has been the impact of immigration over the last 10 years?
I think it's out of hand. It got out of hand and is sold as a kind of a Christian, universally loving gesture, but they don't even control who is coming in. Some of the people of coming in don't come in because they are in war places, but because they think Germany is a good place to live and
get a job.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they don't even know. I think I read or I heard from, I think, a serious source that there are about 200,000 people in Germany that are not accounted, but doesn't know where they are. So it's out of hand, and that means a chaotization, social, that will engender, chauvinisms and hatred and all this. A multicultural society is, of course, very good, but then the level must be higher of the education.
Right.
And if you have people streaming in who declare they never want to learn the language of the country where they are, so what can you expect?
Right.
I think this is a very radical view. If you look at the origins of European Union, you shouldn't surpass what Sir Winston Churchill was having as a thought. The thought of Churchill, this is maybe noteworthy, maybe I give you an exact quote of that, it's very short. Churchill said in a speech in 1947, and I choose Churchill because many people think he's a great statesman and he is wonderful. And I think the first thing Trump did, the first person he had in the White House.
He returned his bust back into the White House. Yeah.
So you saw Churchill in the background.
Yeah.
Now what is Churchill doing for Europe? He was giving in Switzerland a great speech that people love. Union of United States of Europe. And in London, a bit later, he said, yes, we need that, but that's the first indispensable step for the establishing of an all-authoritative, powerful world government. So the Union of Europe, according to a man like Churchill, is only necessary because then you can put it
Scale up into a world government.
Exactly.
Right.
And the world government, of course, is not with European participation. It's a totally Western, anti-European thought, and a union that is constructing along these lines must not function. Because if it would function, then you couldn't put it into a all-powerful world government. So that's why I call this whole project of Europe, on the basis of people like Churchill, is a titanic project. It is doomed to fail, and at the moment where it fails, you can take it over. And that's
so
about
we're
where
in Basel. We just drove by the Bank of International Settlements, which is supposedly the center for the creation of the world government.
In a way, yes, the financial, and it's very hidden. You know, you have the phrases of democracy all over in Europe and in Switzerland, but this is not democratic. It is aristocratic, if you like, in the sense of few people decide. Everyone's the leaders of the national banks of the whole world come to Basel. Mm-hmm. One knows on a Sunday. It used, I think, to be on the first Tuesday. Now it's a Sunday.
Right.
But you don't see anything.
Right.
There are no statements in the press, no questions, no discussions, and the whole bit is like the Vatican State has the privilege of not paying taxes. It's like on a higher level. And no democracy, nothing, no openness. It's behind closed door, as the most decisive things in the European Union are also decided not in openness, but a few people do that.
So one of the things that's been very remarkable about your work and your publishing is you took a very keen interest in 9/11. And you have studied and written a lot about 9/11, and you believe that 9/11 and the truth of 9/11 is very important.
Don't you?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yes,
Good
I
basis.
do. But I want to know why you think it is.
Well, let me give you a very trivial example that everybody can have. When you go to an airport, all the chicane, all the ridiculous thing of people who trust more into their scanners and cameras than in their intuition. Because if the intuition would be trusted, they would smell a criminal and they would catch him. And not, do all these processes that hold you up for hours is an effect of 9/11.
Right.
Patriot Act, etc., etc. So you see in such a trivial level a huge impact. And then the whole American foreign policy, as far as I can see it, is based on this event. Not on the event, but on the accepted explanation of the event, namely these terrible terrorists. Now, someone has, and he will come to a conference we have in a few weeks in Basel. He established the truth that I forgot if I have heard it before, maybe. The whole identification of the crime with the Islamic people is, to say the least, highly problematic. No passenger lists, nothing has established. Not even the numbers of the planes were used to make an investigation. The flight numbers are not the numbers on the individual crashed planes.
Right.
So, and hundreds of things shows there was no will of a truthful investigation, but there was an immediate harvest of the wrong or of the explanations about this Islamic hate of Western freedom and all this blah blah catchwords. There was such a huge harvest which is going on today. Afghanistan, Iraq, all that happened in Libya and Syria is connected, I would say, not with the event, but with the accepted view on the event. And the accepted view is just not true.
So
what
we had a
does that
false,
mean?
right, so we
Yeah.
had a false flag. It was used as an excuse
Yeah,
to go to war in the Middle East.
exactly.
And basically to, I think everybody's seen Wesley Clark's interview where he says, you know, we're gonna invade and take 7 countries in 5
And
years.
they needed a pretext, as England and America always needed pretexts to come as the savers of the Western values of freedom and individuality.
Right.
So, and actually was spoken out by the PNAC people, Project for a New American Century.
Right.
I think in 1999, they could even see it on the internet. Some people said we need a catalytic event like a new Pearl Harbor,
Right.
in order to bring about our...
But their plan failed. They haven't gotten the 7 countries in 5 years.
No, but did it fail completely?
No.
I think a lot of misery has been done.
Right.
And a lot of profit of people who
Right. There's no doubt the Bush syndicate is much wealthier.
you see.
Right.
And even now Ray Griffin has written a book in which he says how Cheney and Bush ruined, I think, the American nation or something. A very radical title, I found.
But here's what happened in America. You saw the national security state explode in size.
Yeah.
And the United States federal budget and the debt explode to support it.
Yeah.
And it's like a tumor, and it just keeps growing
Yeah.
and growing and
Right.
growing. And of course, NATO is part of this.
Yeah.
So we see, you know, a transatlantic infrastructure of secrecy and extraordinary expense
Yeah.
that's like a tumor on the whole planet.
Exactly.
I mean, as a financial matter, it's a tumor.
Yeah.
And the question is, what in the world is this monolith, and what's it doing, and why is it able to suck up and command so much of the world resources?
But you know, coming back to 9/11, as it is a huge event with huge lies around, that gives a whole atmosphere of unclarity and confusion. That's why it is key that this event is clarified as much as possible. That helps us to see other matters more clearly. If you go on for decades with a huge lie of a crime that is in a way unbelievable, I mean, to sacrifice your own 3,000 or 4,000 people and to claim it to other people, that's a very bad action. And to dispose this, it helps to give a new climate of understanding also for other related questions.
Well, it's almost as though forcing the population to agree to and support the lie.
Yeah.
You had this great article in the Present Age where you were describing how this building up this lie and requiring everybody to participate in this lie was attracting all these elemental forces that destroyed the light.
Yeah. That's a spiritual aspect that should be introduced into the analysis of world events.
Right.
And I think there we come back to threefold. The spiritual part of threefold includes that we get beyond materialism, not mystical, irrationalist people, but that we really think through. There are different elements in the whole of reality that play a part. And the part they play is even bigger if we say, oh, we don't want to know about that.
So here's what you were describing. I really want to flesh this out.
Please.
What you were describing is that when you build a world around lies, you pay a price, and the price grows and grows and grows.
Yeah.
And it becomes a drain which can destroy
and it's contagious also.
Right.
And let me turn at this point to a great thought of this man, you know, which is only now posthumously Ralph Waldo Emerson. He had a great thought, I think. And the thought is every physical law has a spiritual counterpart.
Right.
And now he gives an example. And he says, we all know the law of gravity. Everyone could study it very well in 9/11, how the law of gravity works.
Right.
But, you know. So please look at Building 7 to know again, what is the law of gravity? Oh, there's a speed that has no resistance in the ideal case. So, and he says, in the spiritual world, there is not a center of gravity, but there are centers everywhere, and this is truth. In the spiritual world, in the end, everything will end up in truth.
Right.
Everything will gravitate to truth, so
Right.
to speak. With a difference, things fall automatically down, but whether they come to the centers of truth, it needs our cooperation. And that's our human task, to reveal the truth of things. And this is the equivalent for Emerson. That's the other side of gravity, is that everything should be flowing into the truth center. Truth is, so to speak, the spiritual gravity for all things.
Right.
I think that's a wonderful thought of an American who is not very popular, because if you read Emerson, you have to do something which we don't learn in our present education. You have to think a little bit.
Right.
You know, it's so, you can feel, it's not nice sentences, but there is a clarity behind it. When I try to read Emerson or translate some of his things, it's like drinking very good mineral water from the Alps. You know, whereas when you read other things, it's a mixed, you know, it's brandy, it's watered, it's mixed, and so he is a great mind in America. Maybe it's important to stress that America has a great spirituality. This is only one name. You can make
Right.
Thoreau, or you can, I would like to talk about Henry Adams as a new hero for me, discovered in America, not in Europe.
Right.
About a man who has a great appreciation of Americans. They are outstanding individualists, and we need individualists, and we need the clarity that an individualist is not just like, you cannot equate individualism with egotism. This is something that the church always had to try to suggest. In order to keep individualism low, they told you that's egotistical.
Right.
No, I think if you really get individualist, you are more useful for the whole community than if you don't.
Right.
And Emerson is a great example for that.
Right.
And what he says about truth as the spiritual gravitational field where everything has to go through, it's a great thought, because it shows lies will not be permanent. There will be the day where they will be uncovered.
Right.
But the price question is there. Is it necessary to have all these victims, life lost, people in misery, because some people think they are better off if they lie to the whole world than if they tell the truth?
So you're going to have a conference in several weeks, an event on NATO.
Correct. On NATO and on all the terrorist attacks since 9/11 we have in Europe, in Paris, in Munich,
Right.
which have almost always the same stamp. You know, that the guy kindly leaves his identity card in the car. You know, it's so primitive. It's so strikingly not natural what happened.
Right.
Why? Because one wants to rule with terror, with the terror that is in the population, not with the terror of so-called terrorists.
So you and I think that most, if not all, these events are false flags.
Yes. For example, I have a friend, he is in Munich, he is called Gerhard Wisniewski. He discovered that there was a man, a journalist, present in the terror attack in Nizza in 1916. And 3 weeks later, he happened to be present at the terrorist attack in Munich. And he took the liberty
What
to
a
ask him,
coincidence.
what a coincidence. Is there anything that you knew? And you know, he didn't
Right.
answer. And at the end, he sent him a lawyer who said, "You are not allowed to put this question into public anymore because the question already suggests that he was guilty of not
Something,
saying." Yeah.
right.
So these events are there in order to bring the population an insecurity, a climate of fear, which is not helpful for clear thinking, etc. And that should be looked through. Even in Paris, in the Bataclan, there are signs that show there were even little scenes of terrible torture filmed, and you will find these videos sometimes in the world in the future.
Right.
Yeah. So of course these are false flags, and these are all children of the big event of 9/11, which is,
Right.
I can say, it's admirable.
What's interesting is Richard Dolan just did a new series. It was Documentary of the Year on the Salieri Report called False Flags.
Okay.
And it's remarkable, but one of the things he points out is the number of false flags is accelerating.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's almost as though they're producing them the way they produce TV shows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
And as people are so much living under the effect of the lie with the spiritual aspect, I'm
Right.
glad we have talked about that, because that's a hidden aspect.
Right.
So many consciousnesses are dimmed, are ruled by emotions, by fear, that it is not so difficult to
Right.
repeat these things all the time, and people don't notice it.
Right.
You know, already 100 years ago, Steiner said, Rudolf Steiner, who is connected to threefold, as you know, he said, the basic trait of the public life of our time is mendacity, you know, untruthfulness. And I wonder how this should be characterized today. It has been there in a potentized way, and there's only one way out, to try to pierce all these things. And that's why I personally am very grateful for the truth movement, not only 9/11, all the false flag afterwards. And I must say I have a great admiration for people like Bill Winnie and others who go into public and to say what they think should be
Bill
known.
Binney's had quite a year.
Quite a what?
He's had quite a year.
Oh,
he's had quite a year because he's been proven right.
Yeah.
He's been very courageous in speaking up
Absolutely.
about NSA and what's happening in the
Absolutely.
intelligence community, and he keeps being proven right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I saw the film that was shown there, The Good American.
Isn't that remarkable?
I find it remarkable. You know, I have had a question. This man was programming a bit like meditating. Mm-hmm. And one of the things he said is, when you do these things and when you decode a code system of a foreign nation or so, you have to learn to discern what is essential from what is not essential.
Right.
That's a basic spiritual ability we all need
Right.
for meditating. So he had a way of developing these things, which I think is remarkable.
Right.
If he would turn to spiritual interests, that would be quite and remarkable.
Right. But Binney was trying to design a program that would work for the stated goals.
Exactly.
If you look at the unstated goals that the national security state had, they wanted to collect 100% of the data and use it for other purposes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
yeah. Right. Back maybe to the Congress, you hinted at that. I didn't answer it. We will have a Congress with known people like Daniele Ganser,
sure.
who is a whistleblowing of the untruths about the whole NATO system in Europe. 14 nations had stay-behind armies, they were called, within their own nations that were coordinated by the NATO. And some of these stay-behind armies were involved in obvious terrorist attacks that were blamed on crazy people and this and that, but they were engineered in order to produce this climate of terror.
I'm assuming that the American army that stayed both in Japan and Germany were really occupying armies.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
They were not
Yeah.
there for
Yeah.
Germany's security.
No.
They were there to make sure Germany did what we told
Yeah.
Germany to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
Right.
No question.
Right.
Yeah, this is another subject also, how they recycled the worst war criminals in Germany who were in the information system into the American CIA, etc. You know,
Right.
Galen, there's a bridge over to America.
Right.
By the way, the man we both knew and who had great merits for, I think, clarification about crimes in 2001, Mike Rupert once said, "The Third Reich had not finished, it has only changed venues."
Right.
I dare to quote this sentence. A German could never say that. You know, he would be hanged immediately.
Right.
But he said that, and I think there is a big symbiotic connection.
You know, we've done a lot on the Solaire report because of Dr. Joseph Farrell and what he calls Nazi International. So the folding of the Nazi interests, both financial interests and operations, into the national security state,
Yeah.
into South America, and what are they doing now?
Yeah,
Who are they?
Yeah.
So I think there are many, many unanswered questions about
absolutely.
that continued thread.
Yeah, that is a threat.
Yeah.
And now, as I said, we had this conference, we will have it, and it's interesting that 3 weeks before we have a public campaign in 4 or 5 newspapers.
So you're being attacked for this.
The whole conference, before it even started, was executed, so to speak, publicly executed. And it shows something. It shows.
And what is their major criticism?
Well, they all say it's conspiracy theories. It's not factual. They don't bring objective criterion. It's defamation from A to Z, and that's a bit the mainstream press also in Switzerland. You know, it's not different than what we have in England or America.
You know, NATO's just been saved. Remember, Donald Trump ran on a campaign of maybe we don't need NATO, and then maybe everybody's not sharing their amount of Americans are paying too much. The other countries should contribute. So you had the Trump campaign really rock the NATO world and really question whether NATO should exist or not. So NATO's just recovering from that.
Right, but it's a good point to question the NATO, because there were documents coming out that proved that what Gorbachev had always said, that he was promised that after '89, no NATO movement towards Russia would happen, not an inch.
Right.
And this, of course, was broken.
Right.
And now there are documents who show that this is true.
Right.
That
so Russia was made promises both with respect to NATO and with respect to the missile issues that have all been broken.
Absolutely.
And it looks as though NATO and the Americans are doing everything they can to encroach on Russia.
Yeah. And it's, to me, almost miraculous how the Russian government, leading people, Putin, Lavrov, etc., behave with all this defamation in public since years. I mean, one tried to get them into a trap with the airplane coming down in the East Ukraine. It didn't work.
Right.
All the things haven't really worked the way one would have expected it.
So let's divide this into 3 things. You have smear campaigns happening.
Yep.
You have covert operations happening. And then you have the encroachment of NATO and the breaking of different military and geopolitical promises. So whether it's breaking promises, smear campaign, or covert operations, every effort has been made, it looks like, to start a war with Russia.
Yeah. And this is a bit disquieting, I think, because if you go on with this NATO business on the border of Russia, what is already evident, the Russian leading persons were very, very disappointed how the Middle Europeans, especially the Germans, sacked in. They didn't have, a stand and said, we are cooperating with you. But they were doing what the Americans wished with these absurd sanctions that were not helping anyone and damaging also the population. So the disappointment of Russia, who had the highest victim rates in the Second World War,
Right.
is enormous.
And who won the Second World War?
Who won it?
Yeah, they won it.
So the Europeans are a problem because they have lost their identity and their own politics. And that's, for me, something, well, I'm not a pessimist, but I think it can't go on forever.
So why Russia? What is it? Is it just you need an enemy?
No.
And China's too big and scary?
There is something I remind you and I remind us of, which gives a deeper perspective. There exists a group of people who set the tone for the development of mankind today. They wish to rule the earth by utilizing the mobility of the capitalist economic impulses. All circles of men belong to this power structure, which this group is able to bind and harness to its ends through economic means. The essential fact, and that is something we can talk about, factor is that this group knows that there lies a population in the region of the Russian territory that is not yet formed or organized as regards the future. It contains the budding impulse for a future socialist development. Now, socialist is not to be understood in the narrow sense,
Right.
but through social capacities.
Right.
So this is a point of view that we should add to all the clear-sighted analysis of people like Ganser and what's the name of the young man, the son of
Sean Stone.
yeah, etc., that there is a certain knowledge. I wouldn't say it's in the brain of Bush or Trump, but it's behind it, that Russia is important because the future of Russia has not yet unfolded.
Right.
And there are people in the West, this you can show in the literature, who knew there is an aging of cultures, like of the individuals. And the French, for example, were considered to have gone beyond the high point. So they are not important in the future. So you need them as a political decoration. You make important treaties or conferences in Versailles or in Rambouillet to have them in the boat, but
Right.
they are not decisive. England, America, has the capacity to rule the world now in this period. Ideally, combined with the Middle European element, but they have tried to push that out. This is a part of, maybe we can come later.
Well, part of the problem, though, is right now they have an economic model that is dependent on harvesting. In other words, it's an exploitive model.
Yeah.
And so you always need somebody or something to harvest, or
Yeah.
it doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, you know, there's to a certain extent right now, you need an enemy
Yeah.
because you need an excuse. I mean, my question about war with Russia, one of the things that I believe is driving the push for war with Russia is we've been through a period in the United States where we've had a financial coup d'etat.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the people that you use to steal all the money and transfer the money,
Mm-hmm.
it's not the same people you now need to run things now that the coup is over.
Yeah.
So I need a certain kind of leadership during the coup, but once the coup is over, I need those people to be purged and I need a new kind of leadership. And as we're purging that group, they are very insecure. And you have an establishment all over the United States that's unbelievably insecure and terrified. You know, I've watched a politician be blackmailed over pedophilia.
Yeah.
There's nothing that terrifies people more than whether it's narcotics trafficking or financial fraud or pedophilia. You've got a whole establishment which is unbelievably insecure and vulnerable about their position.
Mm-hmm.
They're in the middle of a witch hunt. They're being purged.
Mm-hmm.
So what do they need? They need a war. They need something to distract.
And the war is also economically for certain people always a productive thing, of course.
Right.
They need an enemy. That's the weakness of the Western system so far. It's all dualistic. They always need an opposite. They are not strong enough in themselves. They need an enemy to go on. I think it was Truman who said, the American system can only survive even if in America when it becomes the system of the whole world.
Right.
Which I think is a true insight. But back quickly to Russia. Russia has a future role to play in a couple of thousand years maybe, but it starts today. And this is known in the West. Some people know that. And as one tried to control in the Roman time the Germanic people, because these were the bearer of a future development, the Germanic.
Right.
One tries to control the Russian seed population because one knows they will have their time in the future.
Well, the Americans went in after the wall collapsed, and it's called the Rape of Russia, and we've covered it a lot on the Salieri Report with Ann Williamson and some other people about how we went in. And a decision was made at that time not to completely destroy the Russian government because you had a nuclear arsenal. It was too dangerous to let the arsenal fall completely into the hands of the Russian mafia. And we encouraged our partners in doing this was the Russian mafia. And so we basically raped the place, but didn't let it destroy completely. But what has been remarkable is if you look at the ability of Putin and his group to bring it back.
Absolutely.
It was very unexpected that they could bring it back that way and stand up to the Western corporations, and they have.
That's why they cause so much rage, because they did something not unexpected in a way.
Right.
And
how did they do it? How were they able to do it?
This is a good question. I think there is one key with Putin, that every Western politician could learn something. He has an amazing amount of what I would call self-control. And maybe it's because he's also practicing judo and has certain spiritual openness, I think. And this is striking. Also Lavrov and other people, they never lose their temper to a degree that Hillary Clinton and Trump, who is in a way like a clown sometimes, I think, they don't control themselves. And unfortunately, those people who don't control themselves tend to want to control the rest of the world. And that's a characterization of the...
No, but it's very interesting. If you look at the people who are implementing massive control, that you're right, they have difficulty controlling themselves.
That's the key of every deeper spiritual development. Don't try to control anyone else than yourself.
Right.
We are all the biggest obstacle of progress ourselves.
Right.
And I think that's our main task to see that through. But you know, the Russians, it's miraculous to me how they can stand. But I often wonder, what will happen if Putin is assassinated? It can turn overnight.
So
which I don't hope.
I just interviewed the Saker from Vineyard of the Saker about this, and he said that one of the biggest challenges, his new book is very strong on this, is Putin finding a way after his next term to transition power to something that institutionally can be enduring.
And it would be that is very good, but it would be very important that the Middle Europeans would support the attempt of Russia for a better productive development. But this goes again a recipe of the American foreign policy, which is more than 100 years old and which was aired very clearly by George Friedman. It was the main aim of the American policy to prevent a going together of Germany and Russia. And this has been done and is still done.
Right.
So in Germany, I don't see really people who have an understanding that a Russian connection is a must for the European and not a hanging in the Atlantic bridge, as it is called, which is one-sided, Western-oriented. But this is a big problem. It's unresolved.
So America has made a big investment in being able to implement financial sanctions. Over the last 20 years, a lot of time and money has been spent in using the financial system to implement control.
Yeah.
And if you look at the sanctions that have been applied to the Russians, if you applied those sanctions in the United States,
Yeah.
The population would immediately turn against whoever had had the sanctions applied.
Of course.
The sanctions applied in Russia has had the opposite effect. The population doesn't buy it. You can't trick them. Mm-hmm. They won't. Mm-hmm. They don't fall for it. Mm-hmm. They're much more immune to the different tricks of both, of the media and of official government. So there's an immunity in the Russian people that is extraordinary.
It is extraordinary, and I think it's a sign of hope, at least for me, because in the Russian task for the future, there is something that goes beyond the merely egotistical intellectual culture.
Right.
There are some capacities for a true social development, and the true Russian is not interested in waging wars. There is a peaceful element. Bolshevism has covered that like under snow, but it's still there and budding. And it is necessary that there are people who know this and who don't want to exploit it. In Western countries, you have some people with occult knowledge who know this. Mm-hmm. Steiner talks about it, that they want to exploit that for their own narrow group egotistical aims. And to counterbalance, we would need more people who think in terms of humanity, like Emerson, like Goethe, like Dunlop, like Steiner.
But I think it's fair to say, if you look at the people I know who go in and out of Russia, they say the economic pain that has come from this has been terrible for certain groups in Russia.
Yeah.
And so it's helping Russia build up a much stronger economy in some ways, become more self-sufficient. It's interesting, because of the rape of Russia, Russia is one of the few countries in the world that has almost no debt.
No debt, yeah.
So, but it's been terrible suffering to achieve that.
I know.
And
they have about 1/10 of the military budget of the United States.
Right.
And they have no bases all over the world, do they?
Right. Well, they have bases surrounding them.
Yes.
Russia's act of aggression is to place itself
exactly.
Right next to all
I know this very witty. This is grotesque. That's the guilt of Russia. The guilt of Russia. Yeah. Well, there's a lot about Russia, and I think the Europeans are failing in building a bridge with Russia with a deeper understanding, which they can only find if they don't think in materialistic terms only. So we come back to threefold, which means a spiritual life which is free is a spiritual life which is going beyond the boundaries of materialism in a proper, even scientific way.
Right.
And that's why, unless we get that, we won't also have the new money. This is another point of threefold. If I may briefly come back to that, the basic idea, as far as I understood it, is money is like a horse which has become wild. It has torn itself off from the real production of values, be it physical or even cultural values.
Right.
Now you have to tame this horse and rebind money to real value creation processes. And I think if one thinks that through, this is part of threefold also, you will have a healthy valuation of money, which cannot be an eternal value as some people wish, because it is only mirroring the production of goods, like physical goods, which have a certain date within which you have to consume them. And money should not have a wrong eternity. But this cannot be, I think, achieved unless we have a spiritual life at the same time in which people start having, again, higher values, permanent values. They are not in the money world, but they are there. But if you don't see that, they are projected into the money world, and people want to have growth. That would be like some people would say, oh, we only want to have elementals between spring and summer,
Right.
who bring growth, and those in autumn and winter we don't want to admit, so to speak.
Well, the money issue is tied up with the military issue because
Yeah.
we just had the Trump administration publish its new budget, and they're proposing enormous expenditures, increases in military expenditure.
Yeah, yeah,
And of course, we see NATO reviving from the campaign scare.
yeah.
So enormous military expenditures. Now the northern European countries are talking about building up their militaries. But a lot of this relates to strengthening the currency, whether it's the dollar or the euro. And so we're in a kind of a spiral where, to preserve the global reserve currency, we need to make sure we have the military capacity. The line military has been run down for the last 10 years, so rebuild the line military capacity. The problem is, if you look at the enormity of the expenditures and the enormity of the debt, it's mind-boggling the amount of resources that are going into this.
It's crazy.
And the question is, is the leadership incapable of envisioning an economy that isn't dependent on the promise of war without the actuality of war?
If we would have leaders of the level that we have now in Russia, I'm saying that knowing all the prejudices against them, and they are not saints, of course, but if you have people with that moral status, or let's take the only example I know of the United Nations organization which had a man like Hammarskjöld.
Right.
Hammarskjöld was an exception.
Right.
And if there would be, say, 48 people of that caliber worldwide, then you would have a homeopathic change.
Okay, so here's what's happened in the United States. You have regularly seen people like that start to rise, and they are mysteriously killed or sidelined or destroyed or targeted. I mean, it's
Luther
almost
King,
as though the mediocre...
Kennedys.
Right. It's almost as though the mediocre are really, really good at killing.
Yeah.
And they kill everybody with any light.
Yeah.
They don't let them...
That's why there is necessary an association of those who are morally on a different level, that they are not isolated, but that they are in a way associating internationally cooperative. That would create a force that is not there yet.
Right.
And I think that's maybe happening. My question is, I don't know what you think, will there be an alternative to the dollar power by the Russians and the Chinese before we have maybe another global financial collapse? Because that is, I think, what will happen.
Well, I don't think you will have a global financial collapse of the kind that we had.
No.
In other words, if you look at the leadership is very strong because they've stolen so much.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And they stole it to make sure that the system was strong rather than being drained by the retirees of the baby boomer. I'm just about to publish our study on the pension funds. And essentially what I believe is the financial coup was a way of saying, look, the baby boomers have been putting money in to finance the multinational juggernaut and to finance the national security state. And the problem is, now that they're ready to retire, they think it's their money. And we need them to keep adding money to the system instead of pulling money out. So every year they put in $1. Now, if they want to pull $1 out, it creates a $2 problem because we need the dollars to keep coming. So the question is, how can we shift the money out of the system before they start taking it back?
Yeah.
And then we turn to them and say, well, there's no money. I think of it it's very clever. Put a government in the middle, and here's a pension fund, and here's the national security state. Okay? So I take, the workers save their money, and then I sell treasury securities from the government, and I take the money and I bring it in. And as you know, I don't know if you've seen my latest articles about 21 trillion missing from the federal government.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So then I just move the money into my private corporations who are running the black budget in the national security state. And so I've taken the money from the pension fund and I've moved it into the national security state. And now the pension fund has an IOU from the government, which is missing the money. So I've laundered the money out of the pension funds into the national security state. And I've stuck the pension fund with an IOU from basically the same people who are the taxpayers. It's very clever. Okay, so I can literally...
How to break through this?
Well, first, to break through it, first you have to see it.
Yeah.
You know,
Agree.
because most people are... My point in what I'm writing is there is no pension fund crisis. There's a plan to empty out the pension funds. And it's part of what I call the financial coup d'etat. But you have to see it. And you have to see the fact that the financial system is managed in these ways. And of course, my question always comes back to, it comes back to two things. One is this integrity problem. The system doesn't have integrity, and we need to face that and deal with that integrity problem. But the other thing is, who's really in control? In other words, we live in a planet and the governance system is invisible. And it's, whether it's managing the money systems or the pension systems, nothing has integrity.
And you don't think it would be meaningful that, for example, the monopoly of the dollar is broken? Like Saddam Hussein tried to sell oil not in dollars. That was one of the points why he was on the list of...
Right.
And in Venezuela, you had the same. And what about when Russia and China and so break the monopoly of the dollars? How will the reaction of the Western financial elite be?
The question for me is, if the dollar collapses, what replaces it? Because if what you replace it with is something that further centralizes control, then it's worse.
Yeah.
If it collapses in a way that decentralizes power and control, then it could be an improvement.
Could the Russians do that?
I don't know, because my limited experience with the Russians is they're not necessarily on the other team.
They are not
necessarily on the other team.
Yeah.
So things are more complicated than you would think.
Yeah.
So if you look at where the currency system is going, you have an effort to develop digital currencies that will be far more conducive of surveillance, invasion, and I think of even chipping people.
Is that also applicable to the Bitcoin?
Yes. So Tim Wu wrote a fantastic book that I'm always recommending. It's one of the best books for 2018 in the annual wrap-up, and it's called The Master Switch, and he describes the history of information technology, where there's a period of blossoming and innovation, and then bam, it's used to centralize. And on each process of centralization, the central control grows. And my concern about what's next in terms of next in terms of currencies is, I think where the leadership wants to go is they basically want to be able to collateralize a human being. So if I can integrate digital technology into you, then I can track you and I can use you as collateral. And you're back.
What?
Collateral.
Collateral.
Okay, so let me give you an example. One of the books that most profoundly affected me over the last 2 years was a book called The Half Has Never Been Told. It's a history of the economics of the American slave trade. And there were two things in it that really stunned me. One was the slave population built up on the East Coast, and they decided as it built up to create 3 large corporations, Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana, to really build a cotton juggernaut. And they had a mass migration of slaves into those plantations. And one of the things they stipulated was that 70% should be single males between the ages of 17 and 35. And when I was reading the book, I was also doing an interview of someone about the European immigration situation. And I went to the EU website, and they noted that on all the immigrants that had come into Europe and also Germany that year, 70% were single males between 17 and 35.
Oh.
And I said, apparently it's the same playbook. You know, it hasn't changed. That was number one. The second thing was there were two reasons why they canceled the slave trade. And one of them was that the banks in London kept losing money because every time commodity prices would drop, the plantation owners would sell the slaves west, and there was no way for the banks to prove that that slave belonged to them. So there was no way to perfect a lien. There was no way to collateralize. If you can integrate digital technology into humans physically, suddenly you can. And that is a huge change.
And that's happening in your views, or that's attempted?
I think there is a tremendous effort underway to encourage people to accept wearing chips, integrating chips into their body. And the reality is, as soon as you can do that, you can use a human being to collateralize a loan. And then you're talking about taking away one of the primary reasons why they canceled the slave trade.
Yeah. That's a sinister perspective. Reminds me a little bit of the whole transhumanist project.
Right.
Connected with people like, what is his name, Ray Kurzweil and similar.
Right.
I mean, if you read the stuff of this man.
Well, their basic theory is that humans are machines.
Yeah. He basically looks at himself as a human machine.
Right. Right.
So, you know, in the Middle Ages, we had a big fight in the 9th century to dim the consciousness of the spirit in the human being, so that people from that time on only thought there is physical body and soul. And the soul has some spiritual faculties. But today, it is even reduced more down. Right. There is no soul anymore. There is only the physical, which is doing the whole thing.
Right.
So we come from the three through the one. And one aspect of the threefold, of course, is to restore the knowledge that we have spirit, soul, and physical body.
Right.
That is one of the implications of the whole thing, why it's so important.
One of the things, I have to bring up the article I published from the present age about the process of dying.
Yeah.
Maybe you can talk a little bit about it, because it's a perfect example of showing, you know, the material.
That there is more than the material.
Yeah.
I think it is a very courageous article, because some other people with the same experience wouldn't have dared to publish. He was convinced that it is a good thing to end your life in such a way. By the way, we had some friends who did it also. And then he shows through this experience there is more to it in dying than just going out of the physical body. Right. This is a wonderful thing to become, to accept spiritual realities underlying birth and death.
Right.
So I'm very happy that you brought it over. Wonderful.
Right. It's
And you have reactions from your readers to that article?
Yes, it really, you know, it really helped them shift their paradigm. And I think for a lot of our subscribers understand or know these things, but they have to live in a world where they're constantly being told they're wrong, or that being with people who, you know, are much more entangled in the ways that you've described. So, you know, reading an article like this is such a affirming. It's just an affirming experience.
Yeah. I'm very glad. No, it's extraordinary, and I'm glad that you can make use of it. That shows that the article is not only a European article, but it's of a universal significance, like other things. Right. Well, I'm hoping, I'm negotiating with your wife, but I'm hoping we'll be doing a lot more, publishing a lot more from the present age. Yeah. Well, two examples that fall to my mind is whatever we bring about Emerson could be imparted to you. We have an article on Mark Twain, who has an extraordinary spiritual experience, which does not the public generally not know. And we have an article on the man I would like to talk a little bit in our conversation still. Henry Adams.
So tell us about Henry Adams.
You know Adams is, of course,
Yeah.
Henry was a late descendant of the whole family who produced 2 presidents.
Uh-huh.
I think the second and the subsequent one, and then even an economist, Adams Brooks, or the Brooks Adams. And he's a remarkable man because he was a professor of philosophy, and he had always interests in politics, but he was very critical of politics. And then he had a good wife, a good marriage, and his wife committed suicide out of, it's not so clear to me what the reasons are, and that gave a tremendous deepening in his whole outlook to life. And then he went to Europe on a long trip, and the result of that trip was a book that should accompany you to your travel to Chartres next summer. Mont Saint-Michel and Chartres.
Really?
By Henry Adams.
Oh.
And this is marvelous in all details, and deeply appreciating this architecture and the spiritual background to such a degree that he really praises the Cathedral of Chartres in a great day. And look what I think, and this is an American, a modern American, and he wrote a prayer to the Virgin of Chartres. Please take it with you when you go there. And I will just quote 1 or 2 lines, or 2 or 3 lines. Simple as when I ask your aid before, humble as when I prayed for grace in vain. 700 years ago, weak, weary, sore in heart and hope, I ask your help again. You who remember all, remember me, an English scholar of a Norman name. I was 1,000 who then crossed the sea to wrangle in the Paris schools for fame. When your Byzantine portal was still young, I prayed there with my master Abelard. You know Abelard, famous scholar in the 12th century, with a very controversial love story. So he said, actually, I lived as a monk 700 years ago in Paris or in Chartres. So he brings in, not in a dogmatic way, even reincarnation, and you can really feel this is extraordinary. An American writes a book on this time in Europe, full of knowledge, Thomas Aquinas, etc., but not with an academic historian, makeup, much freer.
Right.
He only printed a very few copies for his friends. And when I was going to my American tour, you have asked me before, I started off in Denver, and my host there put next to my bed the book by Henry Adams in a very wonderful edition. And I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't. I thought, what is that? I've never heard about Henry Adams and Chartres. But then I found this is extraordinary. And even the European knowers of this time and the churches of Chartres and Saint-Michel should take note of this. It's extraordinary.
So one of the things you said was that the way for us to nurture culture is if the European sources of culture could connect with the American. It's almost as though those who want to build a culture have to find each other.
Yeah.
So, so tell me, if I'm an American and I want to find the 10 best sources of European culture, and so I'm ready to educate myself. I'm going to put you on the spot.
10 best sources, you mean 10 best
thinkers,
individuals or places?
No, people.
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 To enlighten you on Europe?
Yes.
Well,
or
I
to
would
help
say
you nurture Western culture.
Henry Adams.
Henry
You're
Adams.
American, start with him.
Okay.
because he was really nurturing himself. By the way, he wrote a book about the education of Henry Adams.
That's a fabulous book.
Oh, you know it?
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
I've read that. Yeah.
Okay, so you acknowledge with him.
Yeah.
You can take Emerson, who made travels to Italy, to Florence. In Germany or in Middle Europe, of course, you can take a lot of things by Steiner about Chartres.
Right.
Steiner gave lectures on Chartres.
Did he?
Oh, yes.
Oh, so I have to do a whole Chartres study.
Yes, you should.
Before I go.
Yes,
Yeah,
if you
Steiner.
have the time. And higher, there is good literature on Chartres, which covers the whole school, which was a place of learning, which was far beyond what the academic learning later did. You know, universal, the 7 liberal arts, for example, they were teaching. And they were Platonists, but they knew about Aristotle. They were trying to blend this. Some of the people were in the middle of the political scene of the age. So this Middle Ages in Europe is a key period. And I was very, very happy to see an American has a deep understanding of that, which I didn't know. This book has never been translated into German, should be.
Yeah.
But, you know.
Another thing for your publishing company to do.
Well, there are, the pile of projects is quite high. And the practical question is, I always need an evidence. Why now this book?
Right.
There are always reasons for a lot of books, but why now? And if you look a bit at the readers, how do they react? Is their feedback? This is connected to the decision what to do, apart from the economic side. Well, with Europe, you have, of course, then a man like Polzer Hoditz, who was a great European, who was understanding the European Europe. Today, we don't understand in Europe the European Europe because it's all Americanized in a way. So if you read Dante in the history,
right,
he was a key European. He was even connected to the Templars of his time, for example.
What about Goethe? Would you read Goethe?
Of course.
Yeah.
Goethe, already his novel or his...
The audience doesn't know we're facing a bust of Aristotle and a painting of Goethe.
Yeah. Well, Goethe was a great European. He was... I liken him with Emerson from a point of view. Emerson had a kind of a Weimar in North America. He is the North American Goethe with a group around himself. And like Goethe, he didn't spend a lot of traveling in his life. He even said, the intellect is a vagabond. The soul does not travel, which I think is interesting. Vis-a-vis that today we all travel all the time, but we leave our soul behind sometimes. So, but for Europe, enlightened, I have to think to make a good choice. Goethe, Steiner, Dante, some of the secondary writers in the anthroposophical movement. What is Europe? I will think about this and we'll come back with some answer later when your journey approaches.
So for me, it's Bach.
What?
Bach.
Oh, yes, of course. Bach, but also Beethoven.
Yeah.
The Ninth Symphony, which is misused. You know that? Misused or abused in the European, hymn.
Right.
Part of his Ninth Symphony is in the European hymn. But Beethoven was one of the greatest individualists in the world of music, I feel. Bach was still divine, he shows how it was. But Beethoven is a Faustian character. Faustian, going through Promethean struggles. And so it is a real misfit that he is abused for the European community.
2 summers ago, I went to Bregenz to see Tornado. And just as an afterthought, the Viennese Symphony, the Philharmonic came over. and did a concert where they played Schubert and then Beethoven.
Oh,
And we went, and it was so, the Beethoven was so extraordinary. It was almost as though my whole field was being healed and cleansed. Is the only way I can describe it. It was one of the most remarkable musical experiences of my life. It was Beethoven.
What was it?
It was the fifth.
The fifth.
The fifth. And it was
The
just...
Pastorale.
Yeah. It was...
Yeah.
I'd never experienced anything like it.
Yeah, it's magic.
Yeah.
You know, from Bach, I think, to Beethoven, it's a step from still a cosmic background to the individual striving for unity again.
Yeah.
And that's in a way more modern, but of course I love Bach. When I was writing one of my biographies on Dunlop, I was playing a prelude of Bach every day because it has the forming quality, not to make you lose yourself in I don't know what.
Right.
So that was a therapy for me.
Yeah. Okay, so...
Anyway, okay.
Some
Bach,
other...
Beethoven, well, it will come. There are so many that they all go now away when I want to quote them.
Right. Now, I want to dive in a little bit to Steiner's concept of spiritual science. So we're talking about it at lunch.
Yeah.
And I think people don't understand what spiritual science means. And it's very important. So tell us what it is and why it's so important.
Okay, but before I do that, I give one answer to your former question about the literature. There is a fairy tale by Goethe. It's not very long. Fairy tale, which in a pictorial form gives you an understanding of threefold, which is wonderful. It's a fairy tale that is, well, you can easily find it. It's translated into English. Well, to put it simply, it's a kind of a completion of the scientific principle of the last centuries. From Bacon to Steiner, we had the development of natural science, which was in a way materialistic, which was necessary to build all these technological things, like down to cameras which don't function sometimes. This is, of course, shows the imperfection of natural science and technology. Anyway, and Steiner was actually seeing this is a necessary development, but it's one-sided. And to complete that, you don't have to do anything against science and say, oh, science is bad and we should not have had it, etc. But you should broaden the principle of exact research into the unseen. Because humanity has come to a point in 1897, 79, and in 1899, a big world historic cycles ended. The Indians and later the Theosophists called it the Kali Yuga has ended. 5,000 years, where the educational program of humanity was turn your attention to the physical world. And that has been fulfilled. When natural science and technology was there, that program was fulfilled to the last bit. Now, this time has ended, and the new 5,000 years spiritual program, I'm talking now about the spiritual guidance of mankind, demands that we turn our interest again upwards, but with the fruits we have gained by turning it downwards. The fruits are exactness, scientific mentality. Now with that we have to reapproach the realms of the unseen.
Right.
And that's in a way the whole gist of Steiner spiritual science, not against anything in natural science. Many facts in natural science are only really deeply understood from a spiritual point of view. There are many examples, I could go into that.
What he's saying is that we can't apply reason and logic to understanding spiritual phenomena.
Yeah.
And that we must.
Yeah, and we must.
And we need to explore it in those ways.
Yeah. And we need to study spirit. You know, in Steiner's basic books like the occult science, he says, and I think it's fully justified, There are degrees of spiritual development. The lowest and first degree is study spiritual science.
Right.
The second is your imagination faculty will awaken. The third is you will have inspirations. And the fourth is you will have spiritual intuition, not belly intuition. Today the word is used in a too broad sense. So, but the basic of a spiritual scientific development is that you acquaint yourself with what has already been researched.
Right.
This is study. And for this, you don't have to be clairvoyant in
Right.
that respect. You have just to have a unbiased mental capacity.
Right.
And this is today a bit a problem because you have many people who are fascinated by clairvoyant phenomena, magical things. By the way, it would be interesting to discuss the impact of a book like Harry Potter. Harry Potter is the most universally read book for young people.
Right.
And it points to clairvoyance, magic, power, and that does not help to come down to a serious study of spiritual facts. I see a great question mark behind a book like that.
Well,
have you read it?
No, I avoid them.
Yeah. Why do you avoid it?
Because I think it encourages, I don't know, it's a kind of escapism.
Yeah.
And I think it encourages a belief in, the only way to get power is through magic.
Yeah.
And the notion that you can sit down and use your time and your intellect to build, create, and access real power,
Yeah.
It takes you away from that.
It's escapism, yeah. And it's also, it's a spiritualism which is not rational. It is irrational. And it is, you even see the hero is a little boy with some spectacles. Nothing
Right.
against spectacles, I wear them also.
Right.
But there is a very interesting passage in Goethe's, one of Goethe's novels. There was a time where spectacles were getting more popular, and he thought that is not a very good sign. He thought that shows that people get much too intellectual.
Right.
And if you have a young person with spectacles, you have a young person who believes he knows everything, he is over-intelligent, This is not an accidental choice, I think, in this novel. So what I want to say by that is there are so many forces that keep people away from a very sober, maybe hard studying of spiritual science.
Well, here's what's interesting. A hard study of spiritual science creates a pathway for anyone to develop their spiritual powers.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
If you depend on magic or mystical experience,
Yeah.
None of those passages take you into real spiritual
Absolutely.
power.
Take, for example, the occult science, which is the best known to me complementary book to the main works of Darwin, which has shown the physical evolution of mankind. This book shows the spiritual evolution of mankind. This does not contradict and outdo
Right.
the other, but it complements it.
Right.
So if people have this knowledge, they have a better ground than if they don't have it. And this is not for personal ends, because at the core of spiritual science are always interests in the humanity, not only in your own nation, in your own race.
Right.
It is the most general human impulse known to me. And that's why it is so actual. And of course,
Well, if you have many, many people studying spiritual science and learning how to build spiritual power, they become impossible to control.
exactly.
And they connect and make each other impossible to control.
I tell you now something which throws a light on, there are other spiritual streams in Europe and in the world, like the Jesuit stream we talked about already, the Masonic stream. Some people in these streams know that our time gives us the task to confront evil, to understand its function,
Right.
its good function at the end. And for that, they know spiritual scientific knowledge is necessary.
Yes. Yes.
Now,
you cannot confront evil
we
without it.
are fighting that because if people take that, they can solve the problem of evil to a certain degree. If we prevent that, they will even fall into the traps of evil.
Right.
Then they get helpless, then they need help, and then it is our turn to show how things are being run.
Right.
That's one of the deepest layers of opposition against the works of Rudolf Steiner, and he knew that. There were some knowers who wanted it not to be spread because they know exactly if it is spread, any power groups are coming to an end.
You know, it's very interesting. I grew up in an African-American neighborhood, and the African-American churches have tremendous knowledge of spiritual warfare. And when I was litigating with the Department of Justice, I went back to the African-American community, one of their Bible institutes, and studied spiritual warfare. And it's very scientific. I mean, it's very rational, it's very logical. Anybody can learn it. And they teach you, and it's phenomenal in terms of dealing with evil. Just phenomenal. And I wouldn't be alive today if it wasn't for that education.
Interesting. The manipulation aspect. Spiritual science is hated by all power groups in the world because they
You're right. You're right.
Hate it.
Yeah.
Because
you're
they
right.
can see if people pick that up, what happens to us. And that's a real factor. This is not a primitive fight against spiritual science because some people, I know
it's
that
very sophisticated.
it's sophisticated, and some people in the church study Steiner's work. It's their duty. There is in Rome, I was told by someone directly who had an encounter there with a monk of a certain order, and he said, look over there, there is a house. In that house there are people whose task is to study the works of Steiner, to check even the exercises, but not to become spiritual scientific people themselves, but to know the enemy, to control it. So there are experts to a certain degree of Steiner which are not happy with the movement.
I believe one of the things that's happening with the cell tower and cell technology is they're trying to get people to resonate with the machine instead of with living things and the divine.
Absolutely.
And it's coming down to whether you resonate with the divine intelligence or you resonate with the machine.
Well, paradoxically, resonating with the machine is not only a dark perspective. If you take Keeley, and your colleague knows him, he was actually a man who knew that the soul power of a moral individual can be put to use to put a machine into motion.
Right.
But only if you have a certain morality. There will be a moral technique in the future where we are not subject to the effects of machines, but on the contrary, we can handle them with certain influences.
Right.
But Steiner already knew about this technique and said, but it is possible that a caricature is developed of power technique which is purely group egotistical, and that's, I think, what we already have. That's an aspect for understanding what's done with Harp. Why are they doing that?
I told you my Bill Tiller story, didn't I? Bill Tiller was the head of material sciences at Stanford and was able to raise private funding that allowed him to prove that human intention can change material reality, including at great distances. And I was interviewing him for the Solari report, and I said to him, Dr. Tiller, I'm very interested in community prayer, and I want to know what you think of it. And he said, well, you have to be very careful. If the people doing the prayer are coherent, it helps. If they're incoherent, it makes things worse. And so what he was saying is, what is important is that I take responsibility to make sure I'm coherent. Now, to me, spiritual science allows people to go at things in a manner which not only keeps them coherent, but gives them the power to, as you said, for a moral man to affect
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
Right.
And there is, you could say, Steiner once said, and I think that's a very good, simple perspective to look at things. You have an occult background in Bolshevism, even in Bolshevism.
Right.
You have an occult background in Jesuitism and in the Western lodges.
Right.
And the fourth initiation impulse is spiritual science. And this is the only one of the four who works based on freedom, never wants to manipulate.
Right.
So it's very natural that the other, which are still in the world, have a kind of an impetus to go on, but they have no interest in freedom. And that's the ratio is 1 to 4, if you like. The modern thing has old structures against it in such a degree. I give you now a symptom. In this book, this was written by the cabinet chief of the last emperor of Austria. This was man is called Arthur Polzer-Hoditz. He was not an anthroposophist, but he was the first person who published in his biography a memorandum of threefold that Steiner passed through his brother to him for the Emperor Charles. This memorandum is the great alternative in 1917 to Wilsonianism and Leninism. Now, when this book was published, it was translated because there was a kind of an interest in the last emperor in Europe, and it was brought out in 1930, I think, in America. In the appendix of the German edition, you found Steiner's memorandum about the threefold from 1917. In the English translation, this was ably cut out. If you don't know the German, you wouldn't see it. Every sentence in the book in which he said, Steiner's ideas seem to me be the only sensible ones, cut out. So, what does this show? That a book about a world-known emperor was sieved through, filtered through, so that the American readers have no idea that there was in Europe a real alternative.
Right.
And that shows the way how these people work. They don't go directly and say, oh, it's all bad anthroposophy, but they do things like that.
Right.
I only found this out because someone gave me this English copy, then I compared, and I was really not believing my eyes. And so the opposition against this has to do with the reluctance to become free individuals.
Yes.
And unfortunately, many people, they would contradict you if you say that. If you say, I don't think you want to be free. They would say, no, I want to be free. Of course, everybody wants to be free. But freedom means individual responsibility. And I think the wish to be free, the will to be free, is not as widespread. Freedom is not a rebellion like in the puberty.
Right.
It's only the freeing from something.
Right. It's taking responsibility and growing.
Exactly.
Right. And spiritual science, or approaching spiritual matters with reason, with logic, is a major contributor to making the pathway possible.
Absolutely.
Which leads me to a question that relates to your subscribers and my subscribers, because I'm hearing from you a similar thing that I hear, which is it often happens to me that I'm having lunch or meeting with a subscriber who's a very intelligent, capable person who has a tremendous understanding of reality, but they have no one to talk to. They are surrounded. They are surrounded by people who, for a variety of reasons, want to believe the official reality, and it's lonely. So how do we find each other?
We have to pierce the tunnels of loneliness with the conviction there are other people, and one has to trust that one is led to them.
Right.
I mean, how meetings come together. Look how we meet. We
Yeah.
met. It took a time, but then if you are really, and I have always the intention, when I was in America, I thought, I hope I will not miss the few people that are on the same boat, but I didn't know it.
Uh-huh.
So there was that teacher in Washington who drove with me over to look at the building of Langley, Virginia, in the car. And before we pulled up in front of the fence, he said, now we are going to be photographed probably. And we both said and laughed, oh, we don't mind, do we? So this is, I think if you have this intention, this is like a magnetic...
Right, you have to create the intention.
Then you have a magnetism in a positive sense. You will attract those people. And if you're not blind, you will meet them. And I think that's one of the most positive tasks we have, that we join forces with people who seem to be totally in different walks of life, but they have in common love of truth, individual courage, civil disobedience, as Thoreau called it. And I think they have to form a kind of a community in order to prepare something like, you know, Dean Dunlop wanted to make a World Economic Conference.
Right.
Economic. And he died. But his organization is still living, and they remember him. So I wonder whether after a certain, I feel some crisis or another has to occur. And that then afterwards, those people who link through the tunnels of loneliness are a certain force.
Yeah.
Those people in these other streams, of course, want to tell you always, oh, this is a, I don't know how the English expression is, Einzelkämpfer in Switzerland. Lonely fighter, isolated maniacs like Lee Harvey Oswald. That's what they want to do with us.
Right.
And that's not true. That's why we organize conferences with these people.
Well, I was talking earlier about the fact that we were talking about the false flags, and whether it's the media, the false narratives or the false flags or false science or what, you have greater and greater push to control a force which is volcanic, and it can't work.
Yeah.
And rather than just let things explode, my vision is you have these people networking so that when things unravel, it can shift it in wholly unexpected ways. But they have to connect.
Yeah, they have to connect. There's a kind of an underground connection that one has to have trust that it works, even if one doesn't see visible results. And I believe in, I was always like that. I believed in the strength of the individual, and I believed in the importance of the great historical laws, both, the great perspectives, but the individuals.
Now, I just have to ask you a couple of other questions before we close. Tucker Carlson just did an incredible interview that I put up at Solari, where he essentially blasted Facebook. One of the founders of Facebook came out and gave a presentation and said we knew that what we were doing was creating addictions and would be harmful to children. But it made me a billionaire.
Yeah.
And now that I'm a billionaire, I can buy technology that will keep me alive for 160 years.
Okay.
And Carlson was basically saying, that this was, or I will say it this way, somebody should be prosecuted for this. This can't be legal.
Yeah.
And but what he was pointing out was a level of systemic inhumanity and a willingness to express this inhumanity openly, which is unbelievably evil.
Yeah.
So now it's clever to become a billionaire by harming people.
Yeah.
It's something to brag about.
Right. Unbelievable. Reckless.
Well, the thing that amazes me, and it's amazed me for many years in the United States, is you think, why is it that these people think they're safe? Now, let me connect the dots. The push to get gun control in the United States is phenomenal. And I think it's because somebody has the good sense to understand, you know, that's sitting up and bragging about becoming a billionaire by harming your children.
Mm-hmm.
Not very smart.
No. But why is he doing it? What is your explanation?
I think he's getting attention.
Okay. Yeah.
But what I find is there's an amorality now, and you certainly see it in and around Silicon Valley, where they don't understand where their wealth has come from.
Mm-hmm.
They don't understand the extent to which they've been subsidized by government and other forces.
Mm-hmm.
And they have an arrogance that is really psychopathic.
I totally agree from what I have seen. There are too little broad interest in the destiny of humanity. All this goes also back to the little interest of the individual who wants power, who wants respect, and who doesn't care about the welfare of others. How to educate people for broad interests? That is another question of threefold education. How to educate people who have real interest, not only in their own little private matters.
And here's the danger. It's what we said earlier. If you don't have the nutrition and physical energy
Yeah.
to understand, let alone care,
Yeah.
you won't.
No. But that's one example of an interest in the nourishment of humanity.
Right.
As a healthy basis for everything else. I totally agree. Biodynamics is maybe one of the most urgent things to introduce globally.
Right.
And the whole vaccination thing, of course, is also has to be handled in a way.
Right.
I think in Switzerland we are still not obliged. In Hungary, people have to. In Italy, I think also, I'm not sure about the legal side.
There's a big fight now in Italy about the mandatory vaccines.
And then in America, I discovered when I was there, it was just, or was it recently before, Colorado has now admitted marijuana and drugs after California.
Right.
So what is the effect of that?
I don't know.
Do you think it's harmless?
No, but I do think there are a lot of applications of cannabis that are very healthy and positive.
Okay, that's another thing.
So.
Yeah, medical.
Yeah. So both nutrition and medical application, I think, are really very good.
Yeah.
I wanted to bring up one thing. As you know, I've been doing a lot of writing and work this year on the $21 trillion that's gone missing from the U.S. government.
Yeah.
So the 21 trillion is just during what I call the financial coup d'etat period. Yeah. So from fiscal 1998 to 2015. 2015 was the greatest amount. 6.5 trillion went missing from DOD just in 1 year. It's extraordinary.
Where are they?
Well, that's the question.
That's
Where's,
the question.
You know?
I can tell you they were not paid into the account of Percy's company.
But it's fantastic because 21 trillion is now more than the total amount of outstanding debt of the United States.
Yeah, incredible.
Well, what it means is that it goes back to here's the official reality and here's reality.
Yeah.
And if there's anything that shows the difference, it's money. So the refusal for the federal government to follow the laws related to the money, to that extent, is extraordinary.
Yeah, it is. But that means the federal government is not really the powerful institution to do these things. They are run by the bankers, by the people who make their wealth with money which is not covered by anything since the gold standard was given up.
Right.
The money has got loose from reality, but that itself has become a reality part.
Well, but my fear when you talk about the collapse of the dollar system is they've pulled out 50 trillion plus out of the system.
Okay.
When it collapses, they have the money and then control the new system. And we're talking about more centralization.
Yeah, that's the danger. I see that.
Right. So I think we have to be very careful about.
Yeah.
To me, money is part of the question of the governance system. It's just part of the governance system.
today, but it shouldn't be. It should be something that is regulated in what Steiner calls the association in the economic field,
Right,
internationally.
but what you're talking about is having a governance system that has integrity.
Yeah.
But you can't re-engineer the currency system without addressing the governance system.
Yeah.
It's part of the governance system, and you have to, for the currency to have integrity, the governance system has to have integrity. And right now, the governance system is a mystery.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, so
Well,
to me, one of the most important qualities of real solutions is transparency.
mm-hmm.
So, for example, you were talking earlier about the importance of people understanding their impact on the whole.
Mm-hmm.
You can't understand your impact on the whole unless you have transparency.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite books about real solutions is by an economist from Michigan named Robert Axelrod. It's called The Evolution of Cooperation.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things he says is that the crowd will naturally shun the dirty players if they know who they are.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that was the big issue on the American campaign, because there's so much anger against the Clintons as dirty players.
Yeah.
So how do we create that transparency? And so much is done. You know, when I talk about this force keeping the volcano down, so much is done to keep that transparency from happening.
Yeah. I would say every individual effort counts. Everyone who wakes up is a kind of in a good sense, a contagious force. But you can't provoke that. It is a free action.
Right.
And free actions are rare, like, love actions are rare. You know what Steiner says about love at some point? Love is not very spread because in the last resort, by love, we just pay debts to our creators. Love is giving back what we have got. But love is not profitable. We don't get anything for it. And as today everybody is used to want to get something for something, this quality is not developed. But that is only possible if we understand how the higher beings have been behind
But what's
everything.
interesting is the love comes around. It's just not tit for tat.
It's not?
Tit for tat. In other words, it's not a transaction. It's a Mandela.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But people who think in profitable terms all the time won't develop that faculty. They would say, why should I? What should I get for
because
it?
they haven't studied spiritual science.
That's it. So we come back again. We need a large horizon, including the gods, including the devils and hell, in order to develop these wishes, this wish for transparency, for understanding. Without understanding, no good action can come anymore. Free action is action out of knowledge.
Right. It's, what is it? Scripture says, get wisdom.
Yeah.
It's the principal thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So let me look at my list. I just have to, not to lower the tone of the argument of the conversation, I just have to come back because part of the reason I wanted to do this conversation was I find that your wisdom is very inspiring for our subscribers. And this morning I woke up and I read the indictment of Special Prosecutor Mueller against 13 Russians. Mm-hmm. And I said, my subscribers are going to need inspiration. It's so embarrassing.
Yeah, it's embarrassing.
It's so embarrassing. You don't even know what to say.
Embarrassing. Yeah. Point them to Russia today because they make a comment with humor, as I told you. Like the lady says, of course it has to be in 13 because they are above it, they laugh at it in a way. They say it's absurd.
Here's the thing. If you indict Russians who cannot be extradited, it means there will never be any trial.
No.
And if you read what they've said, they have no evidence. There's no evidence put forward.
No evidence, anything.
So they never have to put forward evidence in a trial since there won't be a trial.
Yeah.
So they can, and what they're describing is so minor and minuscule. Yeah. Even if it were true, it would be irrelevant.
Didn't they now admit, who was it, the defense minister? we have no proof that Assad used chemicals in Syria.
Right.
Now they say it.
Right.
No proof.
So
But it
here's
was
the
all
thing.
good. The bombing was good. Everything was good. But we
If
have no
you're the
proof.
Russians, and they say this about you,
Yeah.
you know, I hate to say this because this is exactly the kind of thing they did to me during the litigation. You know, basically what all the money on the planet needed was for me to be wrong, and it didn't matter what the facts or evidence were. They just keep making it up and just keep lying, and there'd be no there, but it didn't matter because they were going to smear me with it. How did the Russians, because the Russians are dealing with incredible lies. Every day, there's a wonderful TV program on Russia of their foreign minister basically describing how all of this was American political problems, had nothing to do with Russia. And it was a very good analysis. But if you're the Russians, now every time I've seen the Russians interviewed, they all laugh about this. They think it's funny.
That's the best reaction, I think.
Right.
But it shows that they have, for me, like a bit a protection. Sounds a bit strange, but I feel there is, you know, let's put it concretely. There are great figures around Steiner who talk about their future in the Russian sphere at the beginning of this century. Moltke. Now, if you take that seriously, and I lived with that for 20 years, I come to the conviction we have in the Russian sphere some individuals who are inspiring without being public figures, which help them to get through this.
Right.
There must be a kind of a spiritual inspirational help, and it is important to get a consciousness of that. So there are wonderful positive perspectives, and I think as these people who will now be behind the scenes, I hope I don't sound mystical saying that, in Russia, they know Russia and the Slavic people have an important future, and it cannot be permitted that this is just exploited by narrow-minded, materialistic interests from the West. So they have a protecting hand on the whole thing.
Right.
And I think this is something one can come through without getting mystical. It's
Well,
really,
I know it is because I very much relate to it in the sense that I've reached the point where I find the lies that come from the government or the lies that come from fake news, I don't take them seriously.
Yeah.
There's a kind of immunity because it's not real. It's it's a scam.
Right.
It's like a scam.
Right.
And to me, something that is that, how can I describe this? Something that is that superfluous is really endangered. So there's a real endangerment happening, and I think the establishment doesn't see that or understand that.
And well, where will it lead?
I have no idea. That's why I think this idea of the European and the American connection and growth.
Right.
In other words, you don't wait to see where it leads.
Right.
You simply grow the future without it.
And we need a knowledge that we have both in Europe and in America different layers. The political layer is the rotten layer, so to speak. But behind that you have forces like Thoreau, like Emerson, like Henry Adams.
Right.
With Adams I must maybe add, because some of you here know that he was said of being having an extreme anti-Semitism. I don't see anything else in that. Then he was very sharply looking at the real power things and not having a personal hate on any Jewish person.
Right.
But that might be a point to explain to some people. And I think what we can do is see the best in even the American sphere as European, and see the best in the European sphere as American.
Right.
And so I think it's wonderful that you end up in summer in Chartres, because Chartres is a key point in the whole European Middle Age.
Really?
Absolutely. You know, I tell you one little story. You will find that in Steiner. the school of Chartres had such a strong radiation spiritually that some people got inspired without having ever been in Chartres.
Really?
And who was the example in Steiner, you can check that, was a man called Brunetto Latini. He was a diplomat. He was exiled in Florence when they had the fight in Florence between two groups, political groups. And then he had a kind of an inspiration about natura, the elementals, the planetary beings, up to very high spiritual realms. And this man became the teacher of Dante.
Really?
The Divina Commedia of Dante is indirectly inspired by the whole school of Chartres.
I had no idea.
No, this is not very known.
Right.
Not even among students of Steiner's. So Chartres is a hard point for understanding Europe. So
Okay.
I'm very happy. And then when you see how this man was
Well, I'm going to get that and read that before I go to
deeply
Chartres.
impressed by what he met in
Which
this journey.
means it's going to have to leap in front of 300 books.
Right. That shows you have. That's the intuition I expected her to have. Exactly. Put it on top.
Right.
Don't throw the others away. You might.
No. I just pull it up to the top.
Yes. Yeah. It's not a very nice cover, but you can see it. Yeah. Now this is a phenomenon, and I was very happy because that was the first thing, and the last thing was I was led to Emerson's house, and Emerson is he is an American who had a general humanity interest.
Right.
And we have to contact these people wherever they live, in whatever race or nation they come up. And so I hope you will get a report on your travel to Chartres after that.
Well, yeah, I'm
and
going
we
to
will
see
have
you
it in the
afterwards.
We will see it
Yeah.
afterwards?
Yeah,
When?
I will see you afterwards.
Are you sure?
I'm sure.
I think we meet each
Oh,
other.
we see before
in July.
too.
Yeah.
So let me
In
just.
October maybe.
Well,
You're back in Zurich?
But
or?
we're going to explain Sophia. So I'm going to see you in Sophia.
Yes.
Yeah. So give us 5 minutes and explain what's going to happen in Sophia.
Okay. Fine. Off the camera? Or
No, on the camera.
Well, we will see the Ring of Wagner, which is a great thing.
You have to let everybody know it's an opera.
It's an opera by Richard Wagner. 4 operas actually, 4 parts, 4 evenings. The first is the Rheingold, is very short, and it's about the power making us individuals and making us on the way to become individuals quite stark egotists. And this is the Ring. The Ring is a symbol for egotism.
Right.
Egotism is necessary in a way to make a difference between us and the world, but then the next step would be how to transform this into a real individualism, which is social, which is good for everyone. Now, this is the subject of the Ring, the curse of the Ring, when it stays in egotism. And the symbol Wagner uses is the gold was in the beginning, it was dissolved in the Rhine. And only when it got forged into a ring, the whole curse starts. And at the end, it has to be dispersed again. That's the ring symbolism that runs through the whole ring. And so this is wonderful to see this, because this is not a German opera. This is something which has a universal relevance.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering how this Slavic people will react to it.
Has it ever been performed there before?
I don't think so.
Right.
Parsifal has never been performed last year, where I was. Yes, the Ring has a couple of years ago already. That's I have to correct that, but not before.
I've never seen it performed in person. So this is going to be
Very
my
good.
first Ring.
Yeah, very good.
Okay, well, before we close, anything else you'd like to say about the future of Europe?
I would put it into 2 sentences. We should reckon with the worst and hope for the best.
Oh.
I'm not a prophet, but I know there are prophecies of people who say there will be a third world war. There will be a short, very short surprise attack from Russia to Europe.
Why? Why would they do it?
Well, if they go on with the NATO like that, and if there's a change and not Putin who keeps it Putin, I think it might produce a reaction. I hope not, but I think it is not wrong to think things don't go on ever like that. If the level of egotism, materialism in the layer of those in power is not rising,
right,
we can't expect that things go very well.
Right.
And that's the realistic thing. That's why I think we should expect the worst and hope for the best. But this, I mean, even if there is a catastrophe, we should think, this is a word by Dean Dunlop I loved. If there is cataclysms, don't forget humanity has gone through many cataclysms. Atlantean time, huge catastrophe. It was all over. The whole continents were different afterward. We have been there. We have reincarnated. Everything has changed.
Right.
And that's the attitude we need, I think.
Right.
To be prepared that huge changes come and the development goes on, if we wish.
Right. But I think to look at things that way, you really do need a spiritual grounding.
Yes. Absolutely.
You can't possibly You can't possibly approach or navigate this without spiritual.
But that's spiritual science. I mean, if you know a little bit about, let me just add this few sentences. The whole evolution of mankind is so huge. There was a Saturn period, a Sun period, a Moon period before the Earth period come. There will be long cycles of future development. You cannot count in years. Right. So the right study of spiritual science makes you patient and looking at things in great perspectives.
Right.
And today we have a lot of intelligence married to very, very limited areas.
Perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have no large thoughts, which we also need. We need the small thoughts, but we need the large thoughts. And you don't get them if you don't turn to something like spiritual science.
Well, Thomas, you've been very generous with your time. We drove to Basel. You've opened your home. You've made us fantastic soup.
Thank you. No, this is not true. The transparent truth is it was made by my wife.
My wife, who's a fabulous chef. Anyway, but I want to thank you. It's always a pleasure, and I'll be back in the summer.
Okay.
To keep the conversation going.
Okay. Are you serious? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
I'm ready. I'm in the show. Yes. And thank you very much for coming. Also, devoting your time here. Thank you.
Done.
Done.